Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday morning Parsha class. Today's class is dedicated in memory of Yecheskel ben Zusia, and his neshama, whose yahrzeit is today, his neshama shall have an aliyah, and the fact that 10 people are learning Torah in his memory and in his schus is certainly a great assistance for him to be experiencing his aliyahs on the neshama, his ascent of his neshama, where it has to be elevated to on the day of the yahrzeit. This is certainly serving as wings to lift him up on high so he can have his aliyah. This week's Torah portion is Mishpatim. Mishpatim, the word means the laws. But rabbis tell us that within the mitzvahs, there are three categories. Three categories of mitzvahs. The first one being Mishpatim. Mishpatim, this portion is dedicated to the mitzvahs that are what one would call the rational human laws of Judaism. Meaning, these are laws that, as the Talmud puts it, even if the Torah would not have been given, that we on our own, we would have reached the conclusion that you have to live by these laws. They're rational, they're logical, the human mind compels you to do these laws. Don't steal, don't kill, if you damage someone's property, you got to pay him, and so on. Beyond that, there's also the Eidot, the testimonials, and the Chukim, the statutes. With those two are laws that are not, the human rationale does not compel you to do it, but the testimonials are such laws that once God gave them, we can at least understand why He gave them. We would not have reached it on our own, but once He gave it, we can understand it. For example, Shabbos, Pesach, such laws, the bris, other such laws that serve as a testimony to an event that happened in the past. For example, why do we celebrate Pesach? Because we left Egypt. Why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? Because that's the new year, the day man was created, and so on. So I don't know if God would not have come down at Mount Sinai and told us to keep Pesach, I'm not sure any of us would be eating matzah on the 15th of Nisan on our own. We would not have come to that. But once He gave it, it makes sense, and we can appreciate it and then observe it with passion and with excitement and so on. But then there's the third category, which is such laws that even after God gave them, it is the type of law that we continue to ask why. What's the rationale behind it? And we never get an answer. We don't know the reason. And we do those mitzvahs out of a certain commitment to God only. It's not because our heart, our mind, our own humanity brings us to it, or even can explain it and understand it. It's more a commitment to God. He wants it, we do it, and that's it. For example, eating kosher, not mixing milk and meat, not wearing garments that are woven from wool and linen together, which are laws that even, till today we don't know the reason for them. It's a decree from heaven, and because we're Jewish and because we're committed to God, we do them. But we never really fully appreciate the reason behind them. So those are the three laws. This portion is dedicated to discussing the first category of laws. It's called Mishpatim. In this portion, you'll find laws, mostly rational laws, ones that we can, on our own, we would have probably legislated such laws. In every normal society, you'll find these in in their law books. Once the Torah was given, it made it easier for them to just adapt them. But it's laws that we all understand, we all appreciate. It's normal, it's human, and that's why we do them. Usually every week I go through a synopsis of the Parsha, but if I did this week, this just is maybe every verse is another law. It will take too long to go through every single one of these laws. So I'm just going to give you a sampling of a number of laws, and then I'm going to focus on the two topics that I want to discuss today in this parsha. It opens up with God tells Moshe, first of all, when you teach, it's a very important lesson for teachers and rabbis, instructors, people that have influence on others. He tells him, You are to put these laws before them like a table that is set for your guest. When someone comes over to you for Thanksgiving dinner, they come to your house. So once you call them for 6 o'clock for dinner, right? Whenever you call them, you don't start setting the table at 6 o'clock. You set the table at 4 o'clock. By the time they come at 6 o'clock, it's all there for their taking. It's right there before them. Everything is set up. They don't have to do anything. It's right there for their taking. All they have to do is open their mouth and eat. Here too, and God tells them and instruct. He tells Moshe, when it comes to laws, you have to give it to them like you spoon feed them. Don't expect and don't trust that they'll be able to deduce one law from the other. Perhaps they could do that, but don't rely on it. I want you to lay it out for them in a perfectly detailed system where they can know exactly what they have to do. You see, when it comes to halacha, don't rely on anything. You got to give it to them like you give a little baby to eat. You're relying on the baby to go get a spoon, no, you give him everything. It's all there. That's how Hashem wants him to lay out the law in the Shulchan Aruch. When it comes to philosophy and other areas of Torah wisdom, over there you can hope that the person develops it on his own. When it comes to Allah, Hashem tells him, over here you got to put it like a set table. Shulchan Aruch, by the way, you know what Shulchan Aruch means? A set table. That's what we call the code of Jewish law. It's called a set table. Because in that code, Hashem puts it all in there. That the rabbis didn't leave anything out. They didn't rely that we just have to write this and you'll figure out the other. No. They put everything out. And that's how an instructor has to instruct the students. That's how a rabbi has to instruct his community. Don't leave anything out. Give it to them so that they can understand and appreciate every last detail of it. He opens up with the law of the slave. But if someone falls on hard times, and specifically the Torah is talking about a person who is dishonest, he stole money, and he doesn't have the money to pay back, so such a person has to be sold as a slave to pay back his debt. And the laws of a slave, it's very, very detailed and very, very harsh. If you think about it, the Talmud says that if someone buys a slave, he's really buying a master. Because the laws in the Torah about slavery are they're so humane, and it protects the slave to such a degree that it's better not to own one, because it's like he becomes your master. For example, the Torah tells us that the Gemara, the Talmud says that if someone has a slave and he's going to sleep at night and he realizes he only has one pillow, he has to give the pillow to the slave and you have to sleep on a flat mattress. That's the law, I'm not joking. So this is, you'd rather, who wants a slave like that, right? But that's how the Torah treats slaves. People ask, slavery in the Torah, how could there be such a thing? Well, when you read the details, you realize that it's not the slavery that we're used to, the plantation and so on. It's a different situation. And then it goes through a bunch of the laws, and after 6 years you have to free him. If he wants to stay on, he likes his master, he wants to stay on, then he stays there for another 50 years till the end of the Jubilee, and at the end of the Jubilee he goes free, certainly. It also talks about the slave woman and so on. Talks about when someone strikes someone, there's different laws that if you do something, do these things, you get the death penalty, somebody pay damages and so on. There's also the laws of damages in this portion. If my ox runs wild and gores another person, what happens? How do you pay? What's the restitution? What's the law? There's a lot of details with this. If someone digs a hole in the middle of the street, and someone else falls into it, who's responsible? The person that dug the pit. You have to cover it. You can't just leave a situation where someone else could get damaged. And the laws of damages are in this week's portion, the civil laws, basically. And by the way, we also have over here a law, an interesting lesson in the Torah. The first aliyah ends off with the words "V'rapo yerapo." In other words, if someone strikes another person and he damages him physically, he has to pay his medical bills. He has to pay a bunch of other things too. But amongst them is the bad medical bills. And the guy goes to the doctor and he has to get healed, and he has to pay the doctor for the damage. Right? If you hurt someone, you have to pay his medical bills. He can sue you, and you have to pay him. the rabbis learned from here a very interesting philosophical truth. Many have the question, we believe in God, right? God runs the world. See, for example, there's a group, I believe the Amish, right? In Pennsylvania, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, they do not go to doctors. I think they're the ones that don't go to doctors, right? They don't utilize medical, correct? Well, there is a group within Christianity that doesn't believe in
Seventh-day Adventists.
Seventh-day Adventists and Christian Scientists.
So they don't go to doctors. Why not? We laugh at them. We think they're crazy.
What about a Jehovah's Witness?
Whatever it is, whoever it is, it's not
Also,
important.
aren't they?
But we
They don't believe in blood transfusions.
But one second. Instinctively, we dismiss them as a little bit, what are you, crazy, not going to a doctor? You're sick, you should go to a doctor. But it's not that simple when you really think about it. Who gives you the right to go to a doctor? If God made you sick, He wants you to be sick. How do you go to a human being to interfere in God's business? If God wanted him to be sick, how do you have the right to go and interfere and make him healthy? It's a serious question. You think it sounds so counterintuitive to the way we think. But when you really get down to it, you delve a little bit more philosophically. Hey, wait a minute, it's not so simple. You got to think, maybe there's some merit to that thinking process. Maybe it's a very religious way of thinking. Maybe it's a faithful way of thinking. If you believe that nature made you sick, so go to nature and get yourself healthy. The same nature that made you sick, use the medicine and get you healthy. But if God made you sick, and we believe that He did, we don't believe that nature made you sick. Nature is God's tool. But it's all God running the world. So if He made you sick, with what right do you have to interfere and go to a human, utilize, and go to doctors to make you wealthy? The doctor has no right to do it. You have no right to go to the doctor. It's God's world. He wants this person to be sick right now. Don't interfere. Same thing with charity. One of the great philosophers asked one of the great sages in the Talmud, who gives you a right to give charity? God wants this person to be poor. What kind of business is you giving him food? God wants him to be hungry. He doesn't want him to have a comfortable life. You make his life comfortable. You're interfering in God's business. Now, when we say it, it sounds funny to us, intuitively. But when you think about it on a deeper level, wait a minute, maybe they're right and we're wrong. Maybe they're right and we're wrong. What do you think? What's your opinion on this? What's the certainty that will allow to help another Jew, or another person for that matter, in his time of difficulty? God will arrange that difficulty. Let God take care of it. Don't interfere. It's God's world. Same thing with medical intervention. So this is a very serious question. It's in the Talmud, it's in Jewish philosophical books, to deal with this question. And what's the answer? The answer is in these few words in this week's Torah portion. But you should understand, the language of the rabbis is very precise. The rabbis say on this verse over here, that he should pay when someone damages another person, strikes him and deals a blow to him, and he has to go get medical help, he should pay his medical bills. From here we see, the rabbis say, if the Torah is telling you that you should pay for his medical bills, it means that the Torah gave permission for a doctor to heal. Otherwise, what are you sending him to a doctor? Why should he pay for your medical bills? You're not allowed to go to get medical advice. No, you're allowed to. But it's interesting, listen to the rabbi's language here. Mikan shenitna reshus l'reifel rabbi. From here we see that there was permission given to a doctor to heal. You need permission. Not so simple. The Torah had to put it in there to give permission to doctors to heal. Because otherwise they have no permission to heal. It's not a natural thing. Yeah, it's obvious, go to a doctor. It's not so obvious. The Torah had to make a special dispensation and say, doctors, you're allowed to heal. Even though I'm the one that made him sick, but I want you to heal. It's a special dispensation. It's a special permission that the Torah gave. It's not an automatic. The problem is these Jehovah's Witnesses didn't read the Bible properly. Had they read the Bible properly, they would realize that doctors do have the permission to heal, and we should go to doctors. So they are wrong ultimately. But they're not wrong automatically. You needed a special dispensation from the Torah that the doctor has the right to heal. Because otherwise it could be that logically they should not have the right to heal because God's making him sick. Stay out of my business. You get lost. What are you doing here? You're a doctor, no?
Yeah.
Did you notice?
No.
I didn't notice. You learned something today. You have to have a special permission to heal, and you got that permission 3,500 years ago at Mount Sinai in this week's portion. You got your license, no problem. You can practice medicine. You too, by the way. So this is a very important point of it. And the same thing with charity. Same thing with charity. Who gives you the right to give charity? God wants him to be poor. Who gives you? Because the Torah says you should give charity. I made him poor. It's my business. But your business is to make him comfortable. But it's not so simple. That's the point. You have to understand it. It moves on to different laws. Over here we have the eye for an eye, right? What does an eye for an eye mean? If you damage someone, you have to get back the punishment an eye for an eye. So we know that doesn't mean literally that if you poke out someone's eye, we should poke out your eye. It means financial restitution. It means you have to pay the value of the eye. How do you measure the value of an eye? You know, how do you measure the value of an eye? Today we go to court, you sue someone, the jury tells you, right? The jury, what is it? Millions and millions of dollars. You make someone blind or blind on one eye, you're probably going to walk away with a lot of money. If you win that lawsuit, and you probably will win the lawsuit. Millions, perhaps. But how does the Torah measure it? You'd be so shocked to find out how the Torah puts a value to an eye. Because it's hard to value an eye. How do you value an eye? So the Torah tells us that you value an eye by the price on the slave market. On the slave market. When you sell a slave, how much would you buy a slave with one eye, and how much would you buy a slave with two eyes? What would be the difference? That's what you pay. That's the difference. How then should you value it? Leave it up to a jury. That's an arbitrary amount of millions of dollars. Now, there could be that, according to the Torah, you would measure if he's a person that his financial parnasa came from his eyes. Someone that edits books, that's his business. That's what he makes a living on. Or a doctor that needs his eyes to do surgery, or other such things. Most people need their eyes to work, but that's probably true anyway. But it could be that you would also measure, because there's 5 things, I want to point this out. When someone damages another person, he has to pay him for 5 things. One is the damage. The damage you caused. You took out an eye. I don't have an eye anymore. So that is measured by the slave market, as I mentioned. Then the medical, you have to heal him, whatever costed him to heal him, if you could heal him. Then you have, how much time did it take to heal him? He had to be in the hospital for 2 weeks. He lost work for 2 weeks. You got to pay him for those 2 weeks of pay. Whatever you would make in those 2 weeks, you got to pay him. There's embarrassment. He's now embarrassed to walk around without an eye. It's not there's a value to shame. You shame the guy. He's walking around with a patch, whatever it is. You got to pay him for that. And then, what's the nezek tsar? Oh, that's for the pain that you caused him. Pain that you caused him. How do you measure pain? That's also an interesting thing. How the Torah measures pain. How do you value pain? Okay, what is it worth? How do you know what to pay? You knock someone's hand off, chas v'sholem, God forbid. How did that? It hurt very badly, right? Yeah. So how do you pay him for that? What's the value of pain? So the Torah says an interesting thing. You ask a person that has to go through a similar surgery, and you say, how much would you, if I did this with anesthesia, how much would you be willing to take if we did this without anesthesia? And if he's willing to do the surgery, let's say he'll say, give me $10,000, I do it without anesthesia. If someone's willing to go through such a surgery without anesthesia for $10,000, that's the value. If he says $20,000, then you have to measure. You take a few people and you see what they're willing to pay. You take people that have to go through this operation. If they're willing to do it for a certain amount of money without anesthesia, that's the value. So you have to measure by real life, not by some jury that makes some kind of arbitrary calculation which has no value, has no basis in reality.
But it's very similar to a jury case, because you have a verdict sheet, and a verdict sheet sets forth different items, just like you're mentioning, that a jury has to consider: pain,
right.
suffering,
right.
loss of income,
It all came from the Torah, obviously, yeah. Now comes an interesting law. When we talk about what happens, we talked about if you damage someone. What happens if your property damaged someone? For example, your ox. Your ox ran wild and gored someone. Killed another ox. My ox gored your ox and killed it. Or gored your dog and killed it. Whatever it may be. Happens, right? So here's an interesting law. The first 3 times he does it, the first 2 times he does it, he pays half the value of the damage. Half to that. Why? Because most oxen don't run wild and do that. So the owner, it was an accident almost. It's like, it's not really my fault. It did something out of the ordinary. When something happens out of the ordinary, you can't really blame the owner. Today in America, that's not true. Your liability, you got to pay, no matter what. But the Torah does take into account, because then there was no insurance. It had to come out of my pocket. So the Torah says, wait, an insurance company, we don't care, right? But when it has to come out of your pocket, then all of a sudden everything would be different. So the Torah knows that there's no insurance back then, and even insurance companies deserve to have some respect, right? At the end of the day, it's their money. So the Torah says like this. The first 2 times that it happened, we consider that it's a freak accident, it's out of the ordinary. You can't really blame, but to take away all the blame from him, you can't either. After all, your ox did it. So you have to pay half the damage. So if you damage for $500, he pays $250. Once it happens a 3rd time and on, you already know that your ox is a wild ox. These things triggered, the things that trigger him, and the things that make this happen. You should have put a leash on this ox. He did it twice already. Take care of him a little better. And if you're loose with the protection, then you have to pay full damage. Then it's already, you have no excuse anymore. So in the Torah's now language, it's called, the first 2 times are called a tam, innocent, and the 3rd time is called a muad, which means he's already prone to this type of behavior, and you should have been more on top of it. And if you weren't, you're now going to have to pay full restitution of the damage. That's the basics. And the same thing if your ox went and ate someone else's, ran into someone else's field, made up with all this crap. Can happen. Same thing. You have to pay the damage. It goes on and on, talks about the mitzvah of lending money to Hafrat. There's many mitzvahs. I'm not going to do every verse by verse. You'll read it on Shabbos, you'll see for yourself. Just want to bring out the basics. At the end of the parsha, we have about the holidays. And at the very end of the parsha, we have the continuation of the story of the giving of the Torah. How that transpired. The Jewish people said, famous Nasiv and Ishbaz in this week's portion, not in yesterday's. It's in this week's portion where the Jewish people said, whatever God says, we'll do, and then we'll hear. First, we have to accept, and then you can see try to understand. That's what I spoke yesterday. You have to first accept that what Hashem says is right. The story in the Talmud says that God offered the Torah to other nations first. He didn't come to the Jews first. He came to went to Edomites, he went to the Ishmaelites, he went all over the place to try to sell his goods, and then no one wanted it. But the Talmud is very specific what happened. When he went to the Edomites, for example, he asked them, what do you want? Would you like my Torah? They said, would you like my mitzvah? They said, what's a mitzvah? What do you got going? What do you got? What's the mitzvah? What is it? Tell us. So he said the mitzvah that he knew, you said already, these guys are not interested. They're asking questions that it's not going to succeed with them. So he looked for a way that they should say no. So he looked into the nature of the Edomites and found the mitzvah that was the most difficult. This way they say no and get out of here, and that's it. Then he went to the Ishmaelites, and he said the same thing. Would you like the Torah? They said, what's a mitzvah? Tell us what it is. Again, he said these guys are not interested. They're asking questions. He gave them the mitzvah that it was difficult for them, and said no. Then he came to Times Square, right, the American. He asked, would you like the Torah? And he asked them, what's a mitzvah? What do you got there? He said, these Americans, forget about it, they're not interested. So he looked for the mitzvah that was most difficult for them, Which mitzvah was that? Honor your mother and father, right over here. The parents honor their children. It's not the children don't honor their parents. The parents are slaves of the children in this country. It's the other way around, right? It's not the way it should be. But so in every nation, he picked the most difficult one for them. Came to the Jews, he said, "Would you like my mitzvahs?" He says, "Yes." What's a mitzvah? They said yes first, and then they asked, "What's a mitzvah? What's going on? What? Tell us what?" Yes, but what? That's when God gave the Torah. They said yes first. That was in this week's portion. That's the end of that. That happened, and so on, and so on. Anyway, so that's the end of the parsha. I want to focus on one specific mitzvah now. And if we have time, I'll focus on another one.
Rabbi, can I just say something? Like 10 minutes before you're going to finish, could we have the rabbi here speak for a few minutes with a few questions, if you don't mind?
Well, after we finish, sure.
Pardon?
After we finish,
Yeah,
sure.
after we finish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Why not? Okay, so I want to focus in on the mitzvah that I just mentioned, the one of the goring ox. Again, the mitzvah is, the law is, that if your ox runs wild and damages and gores another person or another person's animal, the first 2 times he only has to pay 50% of the damage. And he's called an innocent ox, tam. Beyond 3 times, you should have watched him better because you knew, and therefore you're responsible fully and you have to pay the full value of the damage. There's interesting laws regarding this. In the halacha, when you look in the Code of Jewish Law, in Maimonides, for example, he says a very interesting detail here. He says that if, for example, my ox gored 3, 4, 5 times, which means I have to pay full damage now, right? But then I sold the ox. I sold the ox to a new owner. He's now back to his innocent status. You start counting from the beginning. If the ox now gores under the new owner, the first 2 times he's only guilty for half the damage. You get this? Now, this is a problem. This is not so simple. Why? Because when you think about it, what's the reason we make the owner pay full damage after the 3rd time? Because this shows you that the nature of this ox is to be a goring ox. He's a wild ox. And you should be keeping a leash on him, keep him protected, put a wall, keep him. You can't just let him go. He's not innocent. His nature is to be a damaging ox. He damages. So why is it that when I sell him to someone else, his nature suddenly changed? What is the meaning of this? It's an ox. What's the difference if he owns the ox or I own the ox? If it's a wild ox, you know already that he's a wild ox. Why should he be liable for owning him? And when I sell it to you, I'm going to sell you with everything about the ox. You know, it's when you sell jewelry, you got they sell you, you know, if you're a jeweler will always give you what do they call it? The certificate. There's a certificate where this comes from, all about this piece of jewelry, right? That you know it's real. It's what the real value is. It's checked by this company. You know what? So over here too, when you sell an ox, the buyer is going to say, "Tell me, what kind of ox am I buying over here? Is this a lemon or is this a good ox? What is this? A damaging? Am I going to what? Tell me a little bit about it, so I know that." So you expect that the seller is going to tell the new buyer, "Keep an eye on this ox. It's a wild ox." But no, he doesn't. He gets. It's a start over. It's like a reset button on the ox. Doesn't make any sense. The ox is a wild ox. What kind of reset button? Why should it get a reset? But yet the Rambam says this. The halacha is that if the ox is sold or given as a gift to someone else, it's a new beginning. It's like you press the reset button. The answer is because the simple answer to this is because an ox, a new owner may treat, has different habits in the way he treats the ox, in the way he handles the ox, and that can have an effect on the ox's nature as well. Like a dog owner, you all own dogs. Everyone over here has a dog, mostly. So you know that a dog, based on the owner, different owners have different ways of they handle their animals, their pets. Probably an ox is even more emphasized in that way. But an ox with a new owner, the owner could be more strict and more, so the ox can also change its nature based on that. The new owner can have an effect on the nature of the ox, and therefore the new owner is a new start, a new beginning, and the ox, you can't go by the old nature, this is a new owner. Every law, as you know, in the Torah, is understood on many different levels. I explained it to you on the basic level in the law of man and courts, how to handle a goring ox. But this also has a spiritual counterpart to this law, like every law in the Torah. It's on many different levels. What's the relevance to me and you? Do you own an ox? You own an ox? I don't think so. You know. So if we don't own an ox, what's the relevance of this law to me and you? We don't have any animals. I mean, your dog's not running wild. It's a different situation. The answer is that we all own an ox. You do own an ox. If you learn some Tanya, you'll know that every Jew has two souls. One is the animal soul, and one is the Jewish godly soul. The human soul is an animal soul. It's called the animal soul in the Hasidic vernacular. Why is it called an animal soul? Your human soul, let me elaborate for 2 minutes on this. We have two drives, two full drives within our psyche, within our system. One is a very self-centered drive. It's about me, what I want, what is it, my own interests, which we all know very well we are very familiar with that drive within us. It's called the first soul, the nefesh habahamit, the animalistic drive within us. I want money, I want pleasure, I want self-enhancement. It's very self-centered. The other soul is God-centered. It's a full soul with a full persona that is God-centered. It wants one thing, godliness. Now I want to talk about the first soul, which is the animal soul. This animal soul could be very dangerous if you think about it, spiritually speaking. When we say it's self-centered, so many people think that the animal soul is a bad soul. Mistakenly think this, that the animal soul is by definition bad. It's very selfish and it's bad. But the truth is, it's not necessarily so. When you say self-centered, does not equal bad necessarily. In other words, there's two types. It's important to distinguish. Self-centered means what's good for me. What's good for me? Now, what's good for me means I want things. I want more for myself. If I can't get it in a regular, normal way, I may resort to ways that are dishonest. So that animalistic drive within us could be the source and the cause for much agony and much sin and much bad. But it doesn't start off as a sinful soul, a bad soul at all. For example, if you can convince the soul that learning Torah is the greatest pleasure in the world, just for example, I'll give you an example. You take a Professor Einstein, such a type of person. He's a religious person? Not necessarily. Was he interested in going to eat as many steaks as he could and go to lay on the beach? That wasn't his interest. What was a man like that? What's that type of person? What's his interest? Philosophy, feel wisdom and things of that nature. His wisdom and his philosophical drive, his philosophical interest came from his godly soul or his human soul. His human soul, that was his interest. That's how he enhanced his own self-pleasures. He got simply, when others get pleasure from eating ice cream and laying on the beach and going on a cruise, he gets pleasure when he reads books and he philosophizes, and he can talk in a room like this with 10 philosophers about the theory of relativity. That's his greatest pleasure. So a Jew, a person who's educated in the fields of wisdom of Torah, for example, if you can train your animal soul, your animalistic drive, your human drive, that self-centered drive, that learning Torah is the greatest pleasure, just like Einstein learns philosophy. To him, that's the greatest pleasure. To you, to learn a page of Talmud is the greatest pleasure. You know what the soul did? That human soul is going to be driven to learn Talmud. If you can convince it that that's pleasure, it wants pleasure. When it's born, pleasure is food. The natural state of existence for a human being is, without training, he's attracted to good food, attracted to good games, to fun and things like that. But if you can train it, pleasure, real pleasure for his music, fine arts, a little more sophisticated pleasures, or even wisdom, he'll do it, he'll want it. If you can convince him that Shabbos is all pleasure. Shabbos is a pleasure. You sit down, your wife sets the table, it's a beautiful ambiance. Every animal soul will want it. Why not? It's pleasurable. So the animal soul doesn't start off as a bad guy. It's not sinful. It's not anti-godliness. It's not anti-God. It's pro-self. Now it's called an animal. You know why? You know why the Kabbalah calls it an animal soul? It's not an animal soul. It's a human soul. We're not animals. We're humans. Why does it call it an animal soul? The reason is because, for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons is because this soul has the power of an animal. When you see an ox in the street, you run away, right? You see a lion in the street, you get lost, right? You go for a run for cover. Why? Because it's much stronger than you, and you can't fight it. An animal is strong, much stronger than the human being. This soul has power. It's got a very, very powerful drive. In that sense, it's like an animal more than a human. A human is not so strong, where, humans are not as strong as animals. The animal soul's drive, which we possess, is very, very powerful. Imagine you can take that animal soul and transform it and turn it into a drive for good things. Imagine you use that power for good. It's got they call it horsepower, right? And an engine's got how much horsepower? Your air conditioner, how much horsepower does it got? Horsepower. Why? It's an animal power. It works strong, right? If you can harness the animal drive within you, that it should be directed towards good things, holy things, godly things, now you got a situation that you can be even better than the godly soul. The godly soul comes with a lot of power, but nothing like the animal soul. It's the difference between a human and an animal. So what the point over here is like this. The animal soul is not bad. It starts off as a tam, innocent. It starts off innocent. What does innocent mean? It has drives, but doesn't have drives for sinful behavior. It has drives for self-centered behavior, which is not necessarily sinful. So when a Jew sins, when this animal gores, the metaphor, right? The animal did something out of its nature, out of its ordinary state of nature. It went and gored another ox. In the metaphor, it would be a Jew that suddenly sinned, fell and sinned. He did something out of his nature. His nature is not to sin. His nature is to be self-centered. You can be very self-centered and be very, very unsinful. Your food that you're attracted to could all be kosher. All the things that's the nature of a Jew, to be self-centered, but not sinful. When a Jew sins, that is a departure from the regular, natural state of a Jew. The first 2 times he's called a tam. He's called innocent. It's not. It's unexpected. But what happens is sometimes when the animal starts goring once and twice and 3 times and 4 times, then you realize this nature has taken over and he became naturally a damaging ox. A Jew could become really bad. Your animal soul could become pretty bad if you don't keep a leash on it. It's not its nature. But once it starts acting out in a way that is unholy and sinful and outright against God, it can take on that nature. And we know this all to be true in our own life. Would you say that sin is out of the ordinary for you, or would you say it's pretty normal for me? What do you think? Arthur, sinfulness for us. Wow, how did you do that? That was so unnatural for you. Or no, I'm pretty sinful. What do you think? I sin. Yeah, it became my nature, second nature. I got used to it.
Right.
Becomes our nature. We became a goring
Becomes
ox.
part of your personality.
We became a dangerous ox. The ox now is sinful. He's damaging the world that God created. He's goring every time he sins, it's another damage to God's world. So this is a wild ox that's running wild. So what do you do with someone like that? When you got used to sin, you got addicted to sin. You don't know how to control yourself anymore. It's hard to change a nature back to the way you were. You fell into it. And years and years pass and you don't know how to control yourself anymore. So what's the law? What do? So there's two ways you can change an animal back to being normal. You harness it, you tie it up, you put it in a pen, you put it in a cage and don't let it run wild till you really change it back to the way it was. But that's very, very difficult. Let's talk about it in the human experience. How easy is it to take a person who is very sinful and does, he's not stealing. I'm not talking about that type of sin. But, person that he doesn't keep kosher, he doesn't keep Shabbos, he's sinful, he doesn't live the way God wants him to. Became second nature. We're not even most of us don't even grow up with that. We don't even know what Shabbos is, or we know what the concept is, but we don't know how to keep Shabbos. We don't know how to keep kosher. My parents never taught me how to do it. Some will say, and they're right. So how do you change that? How do you transform the animal nature into becoming, to harness it to God? It's very, very difficult. Very difficult to really transform the nature, to change nature. The other answer is, you sell it. You have a new owner. What's the new owner? The new owner, we said before in the law of the animals, the dangerous animal, that the minute he goes into the domain of a new animal, of a new owner, his nature, it's a reset button. The nature of the animal changes instantly. Not the nature, but, he gets a new reality, he's in a new world, he's in a new environment, and that alone has an effect that it's, you can't, it may not be what it was before. In the spiritual dimension of this law, let me explain it in the following way. What do you do with someone that's, is really, like we said, a wild ox in his behavior as a human, a human being that's altogether not civilized, he's not living a holy life, the way his parents want, right? He's all over the place. What do you do with something like that? Or for yourself, forget your parents. You're on your own already. You're 40, 50. Your parents are not in control of you anymore. You want to train yourself. You want to change. I've gotten too accustomed to becoming, to just living life by my evil impulse. How do you change that? So I said, one way is to change the nature, but that's a very difficult thing to do. The other thing is to get a new owner for yourself. What's the spiritual meaning of that? When you're here and you're too involved in negative behavior, it's hard to change that, I said, right? What you got to do is, I'm quoting to you a teaching from the Rebbe. He says the other way to do it is, to assume a new ownership means completely put yourself into a new environment. What does that mean? Occupy yourself with positive things in a whole time. In other words, you may have not changed your nature. You still have you still would like to be involved in the stuff you got yourself accustomed to. But if you get yourself into an environment of holiness, it may be a little foreign to you, maybe. It's not who I am, right? I'm this. But what the Rebbe says is, Throw yourself into a new way of life. And in other words, surround yourself with good things, with good people, a good environment. You know what's going to happen? You'll be owned by a new environment, so to say. What happens is it's a reset button. You're so enveloped, you're so enmeshed in good things, in a new lifestyle, that although your nature hasn't changed yet fully, and you're not there at, you can fall right back if you don't really, continue with it, enmesh yourself in something holy and something better. Assume for yourself a new owner, a new lifestyle. So although your life hasn't changed, your nature hasn't changed, but your environment has changed. And when you change your environment, little by little, your nature will also change. But the moment you go into the new environment, you're already not prone to the past. Because you're overtaken by something else. When you try to train a person, I have to deal with this day in and day out. People come to me for all kinds of sorts of problems. They're not happy with their life. Their marriage is no good. This is not good. That's not good. And sometimes a person that's addicted, someone that I don't have the oomph, the willpower to do anything other than just be lazy and what I've been doing for the last 20 years. You can start telling you can go out into his psyche and try to change it from within. That's a very difficult thing to do. You really have to, it's not easy. The easiest thing is to tell that person, get yourself a new owner. What is a new owner? He's a goring ox, he's a wild ox, he's a muad. He's prone to damaging. He's damaging God's world. Put yourself into a new ownership. Start learning. Start davening. Even though you don't feel this is really me, but you know what happens? You're surrounded in holiness. You're surrounded in a better environment. It's going to have an effect on you immediately. And little by little, your nature will also change drastically. With time. But the environment takes over immediately. And when you're in that new environment, you're learning, you're davening, you're taking on new reality, new truths, a new lifestyle. You went under new ownership, and when you go under new ownership, the law changes for you. And it has an effect, a deep effect on you. Now, people will say, how can I become religious overnight? No, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about. You can't do it overnight. But when I'm talking about an environment. The environment that you put yourself into changes. Stop what you've been doing and start something new. Are you going to keep kosher overnight? No. Are you going to start keeping Shabbos overnight like this? Of course not. It's impossible. If you jump too much, you'll land on your head, right? You jump too high, you fall down, you land on your head. Don't jump too high, but go into a new environment. Get yourself surrounded by a new owner, so to say. Look for new. In our life, what that really means, the people you surround yourself with, even going to shul more often, learning a little more often, taking on a new type of lifestyle, more in the psyche, more than in the practice itself. Yeah, you're not going to keep kosher overnight. You don't even know the laws. It's not practical. But little by that will come with time. I'm talking about more the environment. Put an ox into a new home, into a new pen, into a new backyard. Everything's changed for him. It's just different. And suddenly his nature is also, the law considers his nature to just have changed overnight. It's the same for a human ox. The human ox has gotten used to a certain lifestyle. The way to do it is not to change its nature. You're not going to change the nature overnight. That's not happening so fast. Throw him into a new backyard. Throw him into a new ownership. Throw him into a new environment. That environment will change him drastically. And you'll see in the human experience it's the same thing. You surround yourself with holiness, even if you're not fully there. But the fact that the aura, the whole entire picture for you, the surroundings are different. it will have a great effect on you. Doesn't mean that you'll be suddenly despising evil. No, you're not going to despise evil all of a sudden. And you may even be attracted to evil the minute you leave that environment. But if you're in the environment, more or less, you continue in that environment, in the new ownership, in Torah and mitzvahs, you're into that holiness. Shabbos suddenly you're in davening a little more, learning a little more, dabbling, touching, being involved in Torah and Judaism, in holiness, in the new, that will have a tremendous effect. So that's the two ways that a human animal can change. Either by digging deep within yourself and working your nature to change. That's a very long process. The easier way is to walk into a new environment. Little by little, you'll see how things change for you. It's 10:35. Time doesn't allow for the other topic that I was going to talk about, but we'll do that at a different time.
Also, Rabbi, what you were saying, in today's society, people get divorced from their wife to start all over.
That's not what I'm talking about.
A little different, huh?
No research
A lot
on that
different.
one.
No. That's not the answer to a bad marriage. It means, the answer
Get yourself a
to.
new wife.
No.
New
A
home.
new environment means a new owner. That's very cute that you say
Yeah,
that.
new wife, yeah,
But
new
it
owner.
Right.
Could I ask the rabbi?
But yeah, one second, but I want to address what you just said. The new environment would be to change the way you see marriage. Change the way you see marriage. But go ahead, ask your question. Thank you everyone for watching on
Thank you,
line.
Rabbi. Rabbi, what I
Nice
want
to
ask
see you all.
What's the Jewish life where you live? I mean, what is it like? There's 1,000 Jewish people. Out of how many